Ever been caught off guard by someone's rude comment? You're left speechless, frustrated, and thinking of the perfect response 10 minutes too late. Let's change that. Today, we're breaking down how to shut down rude people instantly with confidence, control, and zero regret. Silence is often underestimated in conversations, especially when emotions are running high and someone has just hit you with a rude or disrespectful remark. In that moment, the instinct is to speak fast, defend yourself, or even lash out. But here's where silence becomes your secret weapon. When someone throws verbal heat at you, staying quiet for a few seconds makes them feel the weight of their own words. That pause unsettles them. It's not passive, it's intentional. You're not ignoring the rudeness, you're controlling the space. That silence gives you back your power. You don't look away, you hold your presence. You keep eye contact without trying to break the tension, and that moment, those few seconds, can change everything. A pause after a rude comment throws the other person off balance. They expect a reaction. They expect you to flinch, fumble, or fight. Instead, you pause, and that stillness shifts the energy. It signals that you're not afraid, not shaken, and not under their control. That silence tells them that their words missed the mark. And in that moment, you are communicating louder than any response. You're showing that their attempt to rattle you has failed. They begin to question if they crossed a line. That silence becomes a mirror, reflecting their behavior back at them. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't insult them. You just held space, confidently, calmly, and clearly. That silence isn't empty. It's a statement. It says, I'm not letting you rush me. It says you don't control the pace of this conversation. And more importantly, it gives you time to decide what your next move is. You don't speak from emotion, you speak from clarity. That few seconds gives you a chance to regulate your breathing, settle your thoughts, and choose your words. That is power, because when you do speak, it's measured, it's deliberate, and that hits harder than any impulsive comeback. You're not trying to win a verbal war, you're making a stand, and silence is how it starts. In most confrontational moments, the loudest person in the room looks like they're in control, but the one who remains calm, collected, and centered is the one who actually holds the power. That's what silence does. It centers you. It centers the room. It puts the pressure back on the person who created the tension. They have to deal with their own words bouncing back at them with no distraction. That silence can expose their insecurity, their defensiveness, even their guilt. And all you had to do was not speak for just a moment. There's something magnetic about a person who doesn't rush to respond. It signals maturity. It signals confidence. People notice it. Even in group settings, when one person throws a rude remark and you don't bite, everyone else feels that shift. You didn't get pulled into their chaos. You held your ground. And silence helped you do that. You didn't feed the drama. You made space for reflection. And people respect that. You become someone who leads the tone of the conversation, not someone who reacts to it. You create a boundary without even saying a word. That's influence. That's strength. Practicing this kind of silence takes discipline. You have to resist the urge to jump in. You have to be comfortable with a little discomfort. Because silence in the middle of conflict can feel awkward at first. But that awkwardness is not your problem. That tension belongs to the person who caused it. Let them sit in it. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them realize they don't get to shake you that easily. Over time, that skill becomes your default response. You don't react. You pause. You observe. You respond only when it serves your peace. And that shift rewrites every interaction you have with people who test your boundaries. Silence, when used with presence and intention, shuts down rudeness faster than words ever could. It resets the dynamic without needing explanation. It doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've mastered self-control. That quiet space gives you back your dignity, your power, and your voice, but on your terms. You're not rushed. You're not pulled. You are steady. You are focused, and the moment is now yours. Rude people rarely just throw words. They throw tone. And the tone is what cuts deeper than anything else. It's not always about what was said, it's how it was said. That's why calling out tone is one of the most powerful ways to disrupt someone who's being disrespectful. When you respond by pointing out the energy behind their words, not just the content, it catches them off guard. You're not accusing them. You're reflecting something they thought would slip by. It might sound like, it's not what you said, it's how you said it. That one line shifts the entire dynamic of the interaction because it shows them that you're tuned in. You're not just hearing their words, you're listening between the lines. And rude people hate being exposed like that. The moment you shine a light on tone, you force someone to take a second look at their delivery. You're not arguing facts. You're identifying a vibe, a signal, a subtle aggression that they thought they could hide under polite language or sarcasm. And you're not getting emotional about it. You're calm, composed, and factual. That changes the game, because when someone is called out on tone, they don't have a neat little defense. They can't say, I didn't say that, because you didn't accuse them of words. You noticed the delivery. That's not an easy thing to dodge. They either have to own it or try to justify it. And in both cases, they're suddenly the one doing the explaining. Tone is the invisible thread that weaves power dynamics into conversations. You could say the same sentence with a different tone, and it changes everything. That's what rude people rely on. They say things with edge, with sharpness, with superiority. They want you to feel that sting without giving you anything obvious to fight against. So, when you call it out, you don't play their game. You bring the conversation back to real human connection. You remind them that you're aware and you're not afraid to speak up, not by yelling or matching their intensity, but by calmly holding them accountable for how they speak. That kind of awareness disrupts the passive-aggressive control they're trying to hold over the moment. When you focus on tone, you also stay away from personal attacks. You're not saying they're a rude person. You're saying the way they said something didn't sit right with you. That's a boundary, not an insult. That's power, not pettiness. It keeps the spotlight where it belongs, on behavior, not identity. And that's what keeps you in control. You're not accusing them of being wrong. You're just showing them that their delivery matters, that you noticed, that you're not someone who lets that slide. And that simple act of acknowledgement can shift the way they interact with you from that point forward, because they now know you notice tone and you won't ignore it. It's also a strong way to hold space for yourself without getting defensive. You're not escalating things. You're not snapping back. You're simply saying, hey, the way that came across didn't feel right. That's a confident move. It shows emotional intelligence, maturity, and a grounded sense of self. People don't expect that, especially those who use sarcasm or passive-aggressive remarks as weapons. They expect people to either laugh nervously or stay silent. But when you calmly say that the tone was off, you take their control away. You're not their audience. You're their mirror. And that's what shifts the power dynamic instantly. Calling out tone is something that gets easier the more you do it. At first, it might feel awkward, especially if you're used to brushing it off. But the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. You learn to read the room, read the intent behind the words, and name it without fear. That's not just communication, it's leadership. You're setting a standard for how you expect to be spoken to, and you're doing it with clarity. And clarity is always more powerful than volume. You can still be kind, you can still be respectful, but you are no longer silent. You're showing up for yourself, and that presence is what shuts down rudeness before it gets any deeper. Setting clear verbal boundaries is not about being aggressive. It's about being firm without raising your voice. It's standing in who you are and deciding what kind of behavior you will and won't allow around you. When someone speaks to you with disrespect or steps over a line, the worst thing you can do is let it slide just to keep the peace. Because the moment you excuse it, you're teaching them how to treat you. Boundaries are not about controlling others. They're about controlling what you allow. A calm, direct sentence like, "I'm not okay with that tone," or "That's not how I choose to be spoken to," is enough to stop a rude person in their tracks. You don't owe anyone a long explanation. or a list of justifications. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to say stop, and you are allowed to say it without guilt. What people often don't realize is that clear boundaries create clarity in relationships. When you set them, you make it known what is acceptable in your space. You take the guesswork out. Rude people often test waters. They speak in ways that are meant to trigger you, confuse you, or knock you off balance. But when you state your boundary out loud, you cancel the chaos they're trying to create. You take the noise out of the moment. And that's not just for them, it's for you. It brings your nervous system back to center. It reminds you that you're not helpless in that moment. You are not stuck. You have a voice, and you're using it with intention, not emotion. That shift alone is what helps you hold your ground and maintain control of the interaction. The power of verbal boundaries is that they don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't have to yell to make a point. In fact, calmness makes it hit harder, because when you say something calmly and confidently, people listen. It lands differently. It makes them realize you're not reacting, you're responding. You're not losing your cool, you're setting the temperature. And that's the kind of presence that makes rude people think twice. When you calmly assert your line, you also model respect. You're showing that boundaries are not about punishment, they're about self-respect. And when you show that, others either rise to meet that standard or remove themselves. Either way, you win. People who are used to getting away with rudeness often count on the idea that others won't speak up. They depend on silence. But the moment you use your voice and state a boundary, you throw off that expectation. You create discomfort for them, but not through conflict, through clarity. That discomfort is growth for them, whether they like it or not. It forces them to look at their behavior, maybe for the first time. And while they might not admit it, they'll remember it. They'll remember that you didn't let it slide, and that memory will shape how they speak to you next time. Because boundaries aren't just about this one moment, they're about building a pattern of respect that lasts over time. Speaking a boundary is a form of self-trust. It tells your mind and body that you will protect your peace. It tells the younger version of you, the part that used to stay quiet, that you're safe now. You've got this. And that kind of inner reinforcement is powerful. The more you practice it, the easier it becomes. It starts to show up in every conversation, not just the heated ones. You become someone who communicates clearly, confidently, and calmly in any setting. You don't wait for someone to cross the line. You define the line early. You don't tolerate mistreatment, even when it's subtle. You don't match disrespect. You rise above it by stating your truth, holding your tone, and standing in your values. That's how you protect your energy without having to fight. That's how you make it clear that your peace is not up for negotiation. When someone hits you with a rude comment, the natural response is to get defensive or to match their energy. But what actually shifts the power is asking a question instead of throwing back a reaction. It interrupts their rhythm, it flips the pressure, and it forces them to think instead of attack. You're not just reacting, you're guiding the conversation into a different direction, one they didn't expect. Instead of letting the moment escalate, you calmly ask something like, "What made you say that?" And now they have to explain themselves. That question isn't passive, it's powerful, because it doesn't ignore the disrespect, it puts a spotlight on it. You're not rising to their bait. You're making them sit with their own words, and that changes everything in the dynamic between you. Questions make people pause, and that pause is where the control shifts. Most rude people are used to getting reactions. They're not used to being asked to clarify their behavior. When you ask them something calmly, it creates a moment of reflection, even if they don't show it on the surface. It takes the emotion out of the air and replaces it with curiosity, which is disarming in the best way. You're no longer giving them the conflict they may have been looking for. You're showing up with presence and poise, and that's what sets you apart. That's what shuts them down, not because you're aggressive, but because you've invited them to take responsibility in a way that's hard to dodge without looking even worse. Using a question in response to rudeness also helps you keep your emotional energy in check. Instead of jumping to defend yourself, you're giving yourself a moment to stay in control. It gives your mind space to stay clear. You're not racing to come up with the perfect comeback. You're slowing the pace down and choosing the higher ground. That approach allows you to protect your dignity without having to prove anything. You're not lowering yourself to their level. You're standing tall and showing that you know your worth. That's a statement without shouting. That's control without confrontation. And that leaves an impression that lingers far longer than any insult could. Questions make the conversation about them, not about you. You're not defending yourself. You're placing the focus right back where it belongs. You're subtly holding up a mirror and saying, take a look at what you just said. Most people aren't comfortable being confronted like that, especially not in such a cool, composed way. It disrupts their strategy. It disrupts their confidence. It makes them question their own words and maybe even regret them. And all you had to do was stay calm and ask. That question isn't just a tool, it's a boundary. It's your way of saying, you don't get to speak to me like that without being checked. There's something deeply effective about using curiosity to confront rudeness. It shows maturity, it shows self-respect, and it shows that you're not willing to carry someone else's negativity. You're making it clear that their words belong to them, not you. That one question draws a line in the sand without making a scene. And the best part is that you can use this technique anywhere, with coworkers, strangers, even family. You don't need a script. You just need to stay grounded and let the question come from a place of calm clarity. You're not trying to trap them. You're simply holding them accountable with their own language. The strength of this approach is that it creates lasting change in how people interact with you. They begin to realize that you don't just take in rudeness without calling attention to it. You may not yell, you may not insult back, but you also won't pretend you didn't hear it. You won't silently absorb someone else's bad energy. You're someone who sees through it, speaks with intention, and chooses to lead instead of react. That consistency teaches people how to engage with you. It teaches them that you don't play the game of insult and response. You play the game of respect and accountability. And more often than not, people either rise to meet that energy or they disappear altogether. When someone comes at you with rudeness, the biggest mistake you can make is trying to meet them at their level, because once you mirror their energy, you've already lost control of the moment. The power is not in reacting, it's in holding your center, staying calm, and refusing to be pulled into their chaos. When you don't match their tone, you make it clear that you're not someone who plays emotional ping pong. You lead with presence, not reaction. That means staying grounded even when your instincts scream to fight back. You don't let their energy become your energy. You let their negativity bounce off the boundary you've already built within yourself. The one that says you don't let anyone dictate how you show up. There's something powerful about staying composed when someone else is trying to provoke you. They might raise their voice, throw sarcasm, or toss out passive-aggressive comments, but your strength shows in how little it moves you. You can acknowledge what's happening without becoming a part of it. That's presence. It's choosing not to get dragged down just because someone else doesn't know how to communicate with respect. The calm you hold becomes louder than their volume. It shows everyone in the room, and especially the one trying to rattle you, that you have authority over your emotions. And that right there is what makes rude people back down. They don't know how to handle someone they can't control emotionally. Holding your presence doesn't mean you're passive. It means you're intentional. Every look, every pause, every word is thought out. You don't rush, you don't scramble, and you don't stumble over a reaction you'll regret later. You let your stillness speak for you. The steadiness in your tone sends a message. You're not available for drama. You're not interested in back and forths that go nowhere. You're here to stand tall in your own truth, regardless of how someone else is acting. And that kind of energy can't be faked. It has to be built. It comes from learning how to breathe through the moment, ground yourself in reality, and refuse to let someone else's immaturity shake your self-respect. The truth is, most people who are rude aren't used to being met with calm strength. They expect people to snap, to argue, to get thrown off their game. That's the cycle they feed on. But when you stay calm, you starve that cycle. You take away the fuel, you become unpredictable in the best way because they can't provoke the response they're fishing for. And the longer you hold your ground, the more they realize their tactics don't work on you. That's not just shutting them down. That's showing them they're outmatched by maturity. You don't have to win an argument when you've already mastered your reaction. You don't have to prove your worth to someone who can't even manage their tone. Matching someone's energy might feel satisfying for a second, but it always leaves you feeling off. You walk away carrying their negativity, replaying what you said, wishing you'd handled it better. But when you don't match it, when you stay cool, you walk away with peace. You walk away knowing you didn't lower your standards just because someone else did. And that's a different kind of win. That's the kind of confidence that grows over time. It teaches your nervous system that it's safe not to respond. It reminds you that your presence is more powerful than any insult thrown your way. You're not the person who needs to be louder to be heard. You're the person who knows silence, calm, and clarity can say more than 100 words ever could. Choosing not to match energy is about mastering yourself. It's about knowing that your value doesn't come from proving anything in the heat of the moment. It comes from how you carry yourself when the pressure is on. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. You're not letting someone win by staying calm. You're proving they never had power over you to begin with. That's what leadership looks like. That's what real strength feels like. When you respond with grounded presence instead of heated reaction, you lead the moment. You guide the tone, you shift the atmosphere, and people feel that, they remember it. They may not say it, but deep down, they know they just encountered someone who can't be shaken easily, someone who doesn't lose their cool to prove a point.